Hello, and welcome to Streamlining CET Deliverables for Impact and Efficiency, a deep dive into papers. My name is Kayla Springer. I'm a senior designer and technology specialist at HB Workplaces. I work on design projects, and I also do all things CET and design process and programs for our team of 30 designers. I've been with HB for 8 years now, and I've been involved in the CET process since the beginning. And when we implemented CET now about 7 years ago, I work out of our Salt Lake City, Utah office, where I lived for 5 years. But for the last 3 years, I've worked remotely and traveled with my husband, Brad, and our dog Kona in our Lance travel trailer in the upper left-hand corner there. We really enjoy doing any activity outdoors and anything in the mountains. So we love to mountain bike, ski, or hike, and disc golf, anything we can do with our dog outside. And in the summers, we plan to spend time in Wisconsin. We're both from Wisconsin, and all of our family is here. So we built our home in the bottom left-hand corner there, where we can enjoy the Northwoods with our families in the summers. Here's our agenda for today's session. We'll start by reviewing the background of our CET papers. Then we'll answer a few poll questions with everybody here. Next, we'll check out our current reusable paper file stats. Then we'll deep dive into a few different topics and how we transformed and refreshed our deliverables. And then we'll also mix in a few CET demos with each deep dive and a few topics along the way. Then we'll check out our new stats after our reusable paper file refresh. And finally, I'll leave you with some tips and tricks for streamlining your paper views. So to begin with a little bit of background, we began to discover that our deliverables had become inconsistent, and some of them were deviating from our company standards and our CET papers that we've created and provided for our designers. And a few causes that we think might be contributing to this is one, our multiple markets. So HB has 6 locations each with multiple market leaders, and each of those leaders has different varying opinions and expectations of what our deliverables should look like. Also, our marketing team evolved their deliverables for RFPs. They rebranded our company in 2023, and this was also along the time of the Herman Miller and Knoll merger. So with that change and with our company rebrand, they decided to refresh and elevate our design, and that meant a new look for our proposals. Additionally, they established a standard font that will work in all of our programs. So previously we had a custom font for HB, but that was really challenging because anytime you would open up a template within PowerPoint or Microsoft Word that had that custom font, if you didn't have it downloaded on your computer, it would default to a different font, and then everything kind of looked different and inconsistent. So now moving forward, all of our programs and softwares are defaulted to Arial, and that's our branded font moving forward. And that will work in InDesign with marketing and in PowerPoint and CET, and of course, all other programs. Another cause was that designers began creating their own CET papers to align with that refreshed marketing proposals that were being created. Now, other market leaders, like I mentioned, they expect a different presentation style with their deliverables, and this caused designers a lot of confusion, and they didn't know which standard to follow. Should I listen to my market leader, or should I listen to my design leaders and the standards that are expected of me there? So that also caused issues with KPIs. Our design leaders are constantly looking at our deliverables and what information is included, making sure that we're including all necessary information for our design, our install teams, and all of that. So when things are looking different, different information's included. That means different scores, less scores on our KPIs for our designers, which nobody's happy about that. And then lastly, we have multiple PowerPoint templates that are being used and distributed between the teams. So we have a lot of different teams between our markets working on a lot of different types of projects. And between those teams, they each kind of had their own PowerPoint template that they were creating and curating to their specific projects. And this meant that there was a lot of different styles and paper sizes and colors and all of that. And none of those aligned with our set of our CET papers that we had. So the result is very confused designers and confused customers. Our designers are using multiple programs that are all using different styles. So like I mentioned, we've got PowerPoint, we've got CET, we've got a few other software programs like Excel and online programs, and nobody knew which one they were supposed to be using when. And since all of the teams across our company are all doing different things, it just was a big mess and nobody knew what to use. And our customers are also confused. We're providing them inconsistent deliverables. We're giving them a proposal that looks one way, a thought starter document that looks a different way, and drawings that look a completely different style. So we don't have any unified branding across HB for us. So this leads me to our goal. We'd like to refresh our CET papers to align with company-wide standards while simultaneously simplifying design's process of creating deliverables in CET. Now, the benefits of what this goal could mean: we'll have, of course, refreshed deliverables, and they will be beautiful, and they'll be beautiful coming from all teams, no matter who creates it. We'll have a more simplified process for creating said deliverables. So we're always looking for ways that we can help our designers and make their process a little bit more lean and quick. So this will help accomplish that. Next, we'll also have more streamlined collaboration between our teams, specifically sales and design, because we're always trying to strengthen that relationship. And last, we'll have fewer reusable files to manage, which personally, this is huge for me since I manage all of the reusable files as our technology specialist, and I'm sure would be a huge bonus for some of you as well. So to achieve our goal, myself and our design standards team worked through months of research and development to develop a refreshed set of deliverables that not only looked great, but also functioned better for our designers. So I'm going to skip through the poll questions for this recorded portion. Just asked a few questions to get a gauge of where everybody's at. So bouncing then into our current reusable paper file stats. So at HB, we had 172 reusable paper files total. And now this doesn't include any paper files that designers are creating and using on their own that might have been project specific or market specific and maybe saved on their local drives. And like I mentioned earlier, our last major update that we did to our papers was in 2023, back when we rebranded our company. And the unfortunate thing about this is that we only needed to change one logo on every single page. So it was a lot of effort to go into every single one of those 172 files, change the logo, and resave it. As you can imagine, this was very timely and not something that we want to be doing frequently. And not to mention, I'm a little bit skeptical and curious if all of these papers are even being used. So you may be curious, what exactly makes up all 172 of these pages? So first we have each design phase. So think presentation drawings, preliminary drawings, final drawings, install drawings, and not to include. And then we also have each paper size of those phases. So we've got B size, C, D, and E1 size. We also have papers for each space type. So we categorize our spaces as ancillary, offices, and workstations. We have specialty pages, so think electrical locations. We've got phased projects, we have reconfigures, we have healthcare drawings, all those sorts of projects in different types. And lastly, we have location-specific pages. So like I mentioned, we have a few different markets. A couple markets specifically have a different logo. So that means a whole nother set of drawings and pages for that market specifically. So thinking about where all these paper files are saved, we looked into our folder navigation as well. These are being organized using 14 different subfolders. And then we also had a few files just outside of those subfolders, and then those subfolders also had subfolders within them. So not only was this a lot to manage, but it's also a lot for designers to have to navigate and try to find what they're looking for. Now, I'm a big proponent for great folder structure and for everything to have a place, but there comes a point where less is more. So today we're going to do a deep dive into the following 4 topics that helped us achieve our goal. Starting with the basis of the session today, streamlining reusable paper files. We're going to focus on less repetition for our designers and more consistency in our deliverables. Next, we will discuss client-focused presentations and how we can create drawings and presentations for our customers that are legible and easy to understand. Third is improved collaboration. So we want to encourage better teamwork between all teams, but specifically design and sales. And lastly, we'll top it all off with how to create an efficient CET template by integrating a strategic set of reusable paper files. Let's dive into the base of today's conversation, reusable paper files and how we can streamline it better. Our standard process typically includes 4 sets of deliverables. We've got thought starters, preliminary drawings, final drawings, and install drawings. With our current process, the steps to go from one phase to the next can be a bit cumbersome and challenging. So beginning with the thought starters, when needed, these are typically created in PowerPoint, along with the assistance of CET when floor plans need to also be included. Moving into CET, we start by setting up the preliminary drawing set. These pages are the only pages that are loaded into our template, and they include a plan and a rendering. And then once the preliminary drawings are approved, we move into creating final drawings for our quality assurance checks. After QA is done, the final drawings can be sent along with the final proposal to our customer. And then since we only had papers for preliminary drawings in our template, the designer would then proceed with one of 2 processes. So one, they could transition that preliminary drawing into a final drawing, which means adding favorite files of required notes and annotations, adding any color material and finish swatches and descriptions, adding elevations as required, and then of course reorganizing the layout so that it still looks good and presents well. The second option is they could import a new reusable paper file for final install drawings. And then from there, they would have to reorient the view clip, update the text and the CMF, add any elevations as required. And then now there would, of course, be 2 different pages in the CET file that the designer would need to manage. You'd have your preliminary page and your final page. So they could either keep both and just disable the preliminary sheet, or they could delete that one and just keep that final paper. So the final deliverable that we've just created then turn into the install drawings. So the final drawings are technically considered install ready in our process, and there aren't too many changes that need to happen from step 3 and 4. We simply need to update a tag on there that we use to identify the phase, so it would go from final to install, and then make any potential changes that have happened since sending the project for proposal. So next, I'd like to show a few examples of what our templates and reusable files looked like before our refresh. Beginning with thought starters, here are just a few examples of different PowerPoint templates that have been used over the years. You'll notice that they look definitely very different from one another. Lots of different fonts are being used, colors, sizes, layouts, annotations, all the things. And since we had so many templates out there, there's often a lot of confusion from designers because they didn't know which template to use. They didn't know which account managers preferred which template, and they didn't know how to identify which template would be a good fit for their project. And now here is what our PowerPoint template has transitioned into today. So this is a sample from one project showing a few different layouts. And our marketing team, they did a great job of simplifying the presentation so that it is suitable for many different projects and it can be built upon to what is needed for that client. While it's always been a goal of ours to implement as few software programs as possible so that we can keep things efficient, we realize that thought starter documents like these are much easier to create in PowerPoint. I think we all know that it's a little bit of a challenge to size and edit images and text boxes and do some neat layering like we see in some of these examples in CET. So we're just realizing that these need to live in PowerPoint. And then they can move into CET presentations for preliminary drawings. Which brings us to our reusable paper files in CET. So as I mentioned previously, we have just our preliminary drawing pages loaded in our template, which are shown on the left. It's pretty simple. We've got just a 2D plan and a rendering. And then when we have our final and install drawings in the center, and then on the right, we have our reusable file for phased drawings that we use as needed. Now you can see that these layouts have a lot of similarities between one another. And since our goal is to create an easier flow for the drawings to evolve through the design process, we challenged ourselves to fit all of these pages onto one. And we did it. After taking a closer look at what was on each page and realizing we could really maximize the outer margins, we were able to fit all of the information from those 3 pages onto this one page. This alone greatly helped reduce the number of reusable files that we have. So I'd like to jump over into CET at this time to show exactly how we can transition this paper from a preliminary drawing to an install drawing. So this is that reusable file that I was just showing. So this is our private office layout. And you can see we're beginning with just a 2D view clip and a spot to select an image. Now, there's a lot of information off to the side in the outer margins here, and a lot of it will be instructions on how to set up the page or set up a viewport, some instructions on what to include at this phase of the drawings, some annotations that we can use, whether that's bubble to indicate a detail, a furniture tag, a price, lead time, a typical price, anything like that, you can add those to your drawings. And then on the right, we've got some different notes and phasing colors and our CMF, our color materials and finishes, and then their descriptions. So I'm going to bump over into an example project. So this layout is a preliminary drawing that we've presented to our customer, and they have approved it. So now we need to send it to our quality assurance team. So there's a few instructions here on what we would do to transition that. But what essentially we have to do is we got to make sure that our view mode is set to the proper view mode. So that is going to be the component view mode. And that's going to add on a few other tags. We previously had a preliminary view mode on that showed some brief tags, but component will show typical tags, accessory kits, elevation, symbols, key symbols, and critical dimensions all of that. So I've got that set up. And then I'm also going to set a add-on view clip template to component, and this will add our scale. So for any final drawings, we want to make sure that we're always running a scale of 1/4 inch equals 1 foot minimum. And then from there, so it looks like the preliminary drawing already had the viewport sized correctly. If I had to resize this to be at the correct scale, I would do so now. And then I will move some install notes onto the page. So on the right-hand side here, I've got red text indicating instructions. So move text boxes left 4 using group select. So I know I'm in group select because I get the blue outline. And what that's going to allow me to do is move this text box of information and the header text box together. As you can see now that I'm in single select mode, I will only be moving one. So I'm going to hit S to toggle back into group select. And I need to include all 3 of these items. So install notes, product information, and accessory kits. So I'm going to simply grab and pull and get that pink orthogonal line and type 4, and that will snap it right into place. Then I just need to resize my rendering, make sure it's not overlapping with that font. And then since this is a private office and I've got some kind of upper elevation things going on, I'm going to also add an elevation to my sheet. So I'm going to move my plan up. And on the outer margins, again, I've got an elevation view clip. So I'm going to move that up and snap it to my help grid. And double click and select my elevation. And then again, I want to make sure that I've got my scale showing. And then I'm going to resize my view clip so that I can see everything. That scale is a little too big. And now I can see that I'm overlapping here. So I'm going to just drag that down a little bit. And I've got duplicate titles here. So I'm just going to go over to my elevation and go no label. And then shift my plan just to be a little bit more centered. And now everything's looking good. And then lastly, I just need to update my phase notation. So this is a data field. So when I double click into it, I can update this from preliminary to final, and then it will update that tag on every single sheet. And there you have it. I've got a final drawing. So really easy to transition a drawing set from preliminary to final. And then if this was a phased project, I could grab my phase color and move that. So again, I'm going to read my instructions here. So move the desired phase up to the help line rectangle, then move the text box left 8. So this will, let's say this is phase A, and then I'm going to get that pink line and type in 8, and that will drop in right where I want it on the page. I'm good to go. Moving back into our presentation, we're going to jump into deep dive number 2, our client-focused presentations. So as designers, we can often look at a floor plan and know exactly what is going on and see what is in that typical, whether it's a box file or a file, or a height adjustable table or a fixed table. However, our clients can't always conceptualize that from just a 2D plan. So we decided to focus more on the rendering of the space rather than the floor plan, since they can read that much better than a 2D floor plan. So as you just saw, we're doing a smaller floor plan in the bottom left-hand corner with a larger rendering for those preliminary drawings. Next, our preliminary drawings don't always need the full install notes. At this stage, that information isn't always pertinent to the client making high-level design decisions. They just want to make sure that they're getting the storage that they're expecting, the seating that they're expecting, and they want to see those finishes applied. So, of course, if it is determined that any notes or CMF imagery should be added, the designer can easily pull those items from the outer margin onto their layout. And lastly, we decided to audit everything. We asked ourselves, is it needed? Does it need a refresh? And we began with the title block information. So our previous layout, we took a look at what information was there and if it was even necessary. We had a lot of conversations about this information, and specifically because some teams and markets, they don't like anything besides their company logo in the title block, while other teams, they deem this information extremely crucial info that needs to always be there. So we decided that moving forward, we're going to compromise by leaning towards the majority, or about 80% of our users. And we decided to keep that information, but we did reorganize it in the title block so it felt a little bit more balanced. And then we did remove some info and made it so that it was a little bit more clear for what is included. And then, of course, if a market decides that they don't want it, they can simply move it off the page and not include it for our preliminary sheets. We are going to be implementing the requirement, however, for all final and install drawings that that information must be there because it's critical info. It's things like our project number, the designer name, the date, all things that project managers might be looking at to see who worked on something if they have a question, or the date is obviously important and critical for knowing when the drawing was created and which date to reference. So all very important info to be on those final sheets. Next would be the overall layout. So like you just saw, we are gravitating towards putting the plan in the bottom left-hand corner with a large rendering in the center. We were showing a couple different examples to our testing group of different locations for where the floor plan would be and where the rendering would be and the scale of each of those. And after discussing with a few different teams, it was decided to move forward with bottom left-hand corner for the plan and then the rendering to fill up the remainder of the space. And textiles. So this is another thing that we audited very closely. We had a lot of textiles out there for everybody to use. So we looked at them and determined if we could simplify them and also so that they could align better with our marketing template. And then our view clip add-on templates. Since we removed a lot of the frames from our layouts and scale from the preliminary drawings, we then refreshed all of our add-on templates, and then we slimmed those down where we could. And lastly, our favorites were pay-per-view. So you kind of saw a preview of that in our demo. We have a lot of different annotations right on our page, and we're calling that our annotation toolkit. And that loads in all of our frequently used items all in one, rather than having an individual favorite for each item. So next, let's take a look at how we apply these principles. So here's a side-by-side comparison of our old preliminary drawings compared to our new drawings. Starting on the top left-hand corner, we removed the floor number and the colored scope box, and then we also relocated the drawing phase note. We noticed that the floor numbers were often forgot to be updated from our designers, and they just weren't needed. So we got rid of those. We thought that the room numbers on the sheet would indicate which floor you were on, whether it started with 101 or 201 and so on. That would be your indication. And then we also have part of our naming standard for our documents. In that file name, it would say FL1 or FL2. So that information is always on the file name. And then for the drawing phase note, we had to keep this on, but we relocated it to the bottom of our title block so that all of the important information was all in one spot. And then finally, we still use the specific colors to identify each type of space, like this. But we received feedback that sometimes when the color is on each individual layout, it kind of throws off the coloring of a rendering. So we removed that from our new sheets. Next, we have on our old example, we have a pretty wide viewport. So our paper view is set up this way. It's got just your default big viewport for the space. And we notice that a lot of people are just taking that and running with it, and they're not adjusting the constraints of the viewport. And then this can kind of lead to some confusion because I'm looking at this now and I'm not exactly sure which office we're looking in. Right off the bat, I see that there's a partial view of Office 102. There's some stations off to the side, and it's just kind of causing my eye to not focus in on the Office 101 that we should be looking at. So along with the viewport, the scale is also noted here. So this is another hot ticket item that we had a lot of great conversations around, and whether or not the scale had to be included and when it needed to be included. Ultimately, it was decided that for preliminary drawings, the scale isn't absolutely necessary. However, when they become final and install drawings, the plans all must be at 1/4 inch equals 1 foot minimum, and that must be noted so that all of our quality assurance specialists and our installers know exactly what size we're looking at. And then, of course, if the designer or the salesperson wants the scale to be included, the designer can simply apply the proper add-on view clip template that includes the scale. You'll notice that the old layouts include frames around everything. So I think while the addition of the frames can be helpful, as you'll soon see in the final drawings, they do sometimes cause some issues here and there. So moving forward, we decided to get rid of them. And then I think that helped lighten up the page and made it just a little bit cleaner. And lastly, you'll notice a lot of differences in the title block along the bottom. So like I mentioned previously, we spent a lot of time deciding on what information belongs here and how it should be organized. We wanted it to feel clean and to ground the page properly while still including all critical information. So we moved the client name to the top left corner. We got rid of the address of the client, and then we got rid of the sheet number that was often noticed when you had to do some post-processing edits to merge documents together. That was a big challenge to always have to edit that number. So we got rid of it. And then we also just condensed the information to the right-hand side, moved the logo to the left hand, just kind of did some reorganizing. And then here's a clean image of just that new preliminary drawing. And I also want to mention that this is just one example of what a preliminary drawing can look like. Of course, each project is different than the last and has different needs. So we are always encouraging our designers to modify the page as needed to suit their specific project needs. So on to the final drawings. Here's kind of where I wanted to highlight the issue we commonly see with frames around items. So we set up the papers so that each area of the layout had a black frame around it. So the plan has a frame, rendering has a frame, elevation, the notes, all of that. But as you can see here, if the rendering is sized to the exact size of the rectangle frame there, and if it happens to be layered set to top or in front, it will hide the frame, making some weird inconsistencies on the layout. So since we removed the frames altogether, we won't have this issue anymore. Then we also relocated the date from the upper right-hand corner to be included in the title block instead. So you'll see that that's moved to the bottom right-hand corner. And then we also previously labeled each paper by furniture plan or component plan or panel plan. But we decided to remove that since it's pretty apparent what type of layout it is by what is included in the view mode. And lastly, we simplified the notes on the right-hand side and adjusted the size and the color of the text. So we felt that the labels on the page were way too large and heavy. So where it says plan, rendering, elevation, accessory kits, that was just taking up a lot of real estate. So we simplified that down, and then we changed all of the text to black. So you'll notice the plan notes and then the phase note where it says final are all in red. And I guess we did this just since we thought this is important and we want your eyes to be drawn to it. But again, we just wanted to simplify things, make the layout a little bit easier on your eyes, and really focus on just the coloring of the rendering and the floor plan. So this is where our final install drawings have landed. Then on to deep dive number 3, improved collaboration. So beginning with marketing, once we noticed that their deliverables had been enhanced, we partnered with them to develop a PowerPoint template that design and sales could use moving forward. We put together a group of sales and designers from each market to beta test the new template and found that it worked great and our clients were loving it. We got rid of all other PowerPoint templates. And of course, we understand that there can be some of these hidden on people's individual computers and desktops, but we're working on instructing everybody to only use the PowerPoint design presentation template that marketing has created. Additionally, we've also been trying to push sales to own thought starter documents more so that they can focus on pulling imagery and that side of the project, while design can focus on tasks in CET, like space planning and planning furniture supports and finishes and all of that. So jury's still out on how that one has been going, though. And the next step that we use is that I took that new PowerPoint template as a baseline for design for the new papers in CET. So then with our new refreshed papers, design can create a drawing set in CET that aligns well with the thought starter documents that sales created in PowerPoint. The two documents could either be presented separately to our clients, or they could be combined in PDF in a tool like Bluebeam or Adobe to be one presentation, or they could be combined directly in PowerPoint using the export to PowerPoint function in CET. So the idea would be that design can focus on creating those layouts and renderings in CET, while sales is creating the thought starters document in PowerPoint. And then once complete, the designer can export to PowerPoint so that the two presentations can be merged and edited in PowerPoint together. Now, keep in mind that you can't import PowerPoint back into CET. So any edits that you make in PowerPoint will also need to be made in CET. So definitely use this tool sparingly if you're editing the deliverables a ton in PowerPoint so that you don't have to do double the work. With these tools and a common deliverable style between all three teams, we're now presenting deliverables to our customers as one unified brand. So I'm going to show a quick demo of the export to PowerPoint function in CET. So I've got I'm going to go to a different, all of these sheets will export to PowerPoint. So if you have sheets that are disabled here, I'll show you how those import into PowerPoint. But basically, if you're on the Paper Tools tab in Paperspace and go all the way to the bottom, there's Export to PowerPoint. So I'm going to click that, and I'm just going to rename this as my file name. virtual presentation. And that will do some thinking and working to export into PowerPoint. All right, and then once that's done exporting, it'll ask if you want to open the PowerPoint file. I'm going to say yes. And here is that document exported into PowerPoint. So you'll see even everything that's out in the outer margins also exports. And I mentioned if you have a page that's disabled in CET, it will come into PowerPoint as hidden. So that won't print when you save this to a PDF. So you can, if you want to see it, you can go in and unhide the slide or right click and hide the slide again. And then once it's in CET, you can have full option to edit any of the text, any of the images, really anything in here. So if I go into that final drawing, here's that final drawing that we created for the office. And I can then make any modifications. But really what I would want to do here, if I'm collaborating with a sales team member and they've created a thought starter document, I can then open that document that they created and copy and paste these layouts into their presentation. That then brings us to our fourth and final deep dive, and that is CET template efficiency. So we use the 80-20 approach when thinking about what should be included in things. So what is used most often? What is used on 80% of projects? So if a paper gets used 80% of the time, it should likely be included in our template. Not to say that those other 20% of projects aren't important. We just have the files that are needed for those projects saved in our network folders. And the same goes for folder structure. Our previous folder structure, they involved a lot of subfolders, which meant a lot of clicks to find what you're looking for. And our refresh folder structure has the most common papers right within the pay-per-view folder. All the papers that are accessed maybe 20% of the time are in subfolders. So let's just take a quick look at that. So on the left-hand side is our old organization of our folders. You'll see I've got all sorts of folders, and then I've got 4 reusable paper files out on the outside. Cover, legend, and a contact page. And then if I needed a overall black and white drawing, I'd have to click into there, find the size that I'm looking for, and bring it in. If I had a reconfigure, I'd have to go in here, and now I see I've got more subfolders to navigate through. I want to do a split page. So then I go into there and then find which file that I need based on the size that I need. So it's just a lot of clicks, as you can imagine, to go in and find what you're looking for. So on the right side is our refreshed folder structure. So like I said, we're looking at our 80% used papers. So these individual paper files right out here are those reusable paper files that are loaded right in our template. These are the items that are used on most of our projects 80% of the time. Now, if you have a reconfigure, those don't happen as often as just regular projects. So 20% of the time you're coming into this folder. Now we still do have some subfolders in here just to keep things organized, but those sheets are much less in here to find and navigate. And then we've grouped all of our large format sheets into one folder. So we have everything named with what size it is first, and then what type of paper it is. And then we have a couple text notes in here just to remind you of what paper size these all are. And then we've got some miscellaneous pages. We've got a few overall sheets that are needed sometimes. typical pages, electrical locations, and then again, I've added a text note in here that all of these sheet sizes are B size unless noted. So this one marketing proposal, this is for a different PowerPoint that marketing created, more of a print style that we would be printing into a booklet. We've got a layout for that. So I would say probably 9 times out of 10, we're printing on an 11 by 17 sheet. So we previously had all of our sheets noted with a B before everything, or a C or a D, but we went ahead and got rid of that. And if it doesn't have anything, it's to be assumed that that's an 11 by 17. So lastly, I always stress to designers that it's super important to name your pages in CET. I can't stress enough how stressful it is to go into a file with 50 pages and they're all named like this. And there's no numbers, there's no component notation or panel electric notation. Nothing has been updated. It just stresses me out so much. And it's a lot of clicking to identify what sheet is what and what room I'm in, where I'm at, that sort of thing. So I always suggest that you're renaming your pages. So I've made it really easy on our reusable files that it's indicated with just the number symbol on the ancillary private office and workstation sheet. So you simply just put the room number there. That's all you really have to do to rename it, with the exception of workstations. We've got these with a C at the end for a component plan. And then you would change that to PE for panel electrical plan, or a T for tile plan, or PET if they're combined. And from there, it should be pretty straightforward. And then if you get a larger sheet imported into here, those sheets will have either a C, a D, or an E1 ahead of it so that you can easily remember what size page that is. So let's kind of circle back and take a look at what our new reusable paper file stats are after our refresh. So we reduced our paper views by 62%, which that brings us down to 66 papers total. And as a reminder, we started with 172 papers, so significantly less papers to manage. Our biggest update is that we combined the preliminary, the final, the install, and the phased papers from 3 papers down to 1. And then for the workstation pages, we also decided to take the 2 sheets that we had. So we had a sheet for component and a sheet for panel, electric, and tile. And we combined that onto 1 sheet by utilizing the outer margin. And we placed the panel, electric, and tile viewports down below. And then those can easily be brought onto the layout for the final drawing stage. We did end up keeping the multiple paper sizes because that's, of course, necessary. But the change that I just mentioned above to include the PET viewports on the component layouts helped cut down the sheets by eliminating 19 papers alone. And then we kept all of the layouts for each space type. So we debated this one heavily if we would just have 1 sheet that would cover ancillary office and stations, but we decided to keep them their own because they each have kind of specific needs in terms of notes, annotations, view mode settings, elevations, and so we decided to keep them separate. And then it also helps to keep them separate to encourage a better naming structure of the papers in CET. So they automatically come in with ANC or PO or WS at the beginning. And then for specialty pages, we did keep a majority of these, with the exception of the phase drawings. So we got rid of all of those and we combined those onto our preliminary drawing that can evolve into that as needed. And that alone eliminated 11 papers right there. And then the final biggest change was getting rid of the location-specific pages. So in an effort to not have a complete copy of the 66 pages that we're now down to, we created all of the sheets to include both logos. So we've got our main logo for HB Workplaces, and then we also have a secondary logo that's used for our HB Workplaces Sprague solutions. And that is just off the side of our HB Workplaces logo. And that can simply just be dragged in from that outer margin over the top of the current logo, and then that current logo can be removed. And then in an effort to help that location and their designers, we also created a template specific to that location. So they can just default to that template, and the pages that are loaded into that template, we've removed the HB Workplaces logo and added their logo. And then they also prefer to not include any of that information in the gray title bar. So we've pulled that off into the outer margin, and so that it's not there for those preliminary drawings, but it is still there and available for the designers to pull up onto the page for the final drawings. So these small steps help streamline the designer's process and definitely have a lot fewer clicks to create a beautiful set of drawings. So lastly, regarding the folder structure, as we just saw in my previous demo, we've drastically cut down the number of subfolders by 72%. This means a lot less clicking in and out of folders, and hopefully a lot less confusion for what's even available and what's out there for our designers to use. So, did we achieve our goal? Designers are reporting less time to transition the drawings from preliminary and final. This, of course, is a huge win for all of us, since I'm assuming we're all in the same boat, that there are just too many tasks to accomplish in a day as it is. So anything that we can do to make this transition time less is a win. Our account managers and our customers are also really loving the new design. So I specifically tested this new set of drawings with one account manager. And it didn't take very long for the other designers to start reaching out to me, because they were also working with that account manager, and they were requesting for me to send the refresh papers to them, because that account manager was asking that they use the new papers because she just loved them so much and loved the look. So I was happy to share out those paper files, even though they were a work in progress for a while, because that just meant more people testing them and that I would get more feedback on how they're functioning. Next, our market leaders are appreciating the flexibility that the pages have. So as part of our design standards group, we're always striving for a unified look to our deliverables across the board. Not only does it, of course, provide one unified brand for HB, but it also makes things like tracking KPIs a lot simpler. And our new refresh pages provide a basic structure to ensure that all of our deliverables have the same bones at a minimum. But it also provides the flexibility for our designers to create a deliverable that speaks to their specific client. They have that flexibility to reorient the page as it works for that room and that rendering, and include information on preliminary drawings that maybe don't need to be there or does need to be there, but it's always out in the margin for when they're needing to include it for final drawings. And finally, we have a lot less reusable files to manage, which means a happier technology specialist, aka me. During this process, we constantly were thinking about how we could clean up our folders and lessen the amount of reusable files that we have. And I'm really partial to this because I manage all of these files. So it's a lot to manage. And I also think it's difficult for our designers to know exactly what's out there and understand what's even available for them to use and access to create projects. So it's really a lot of digging into subfolders to see what's there and available, and we don't always have time to do that. So during this process, we not only reduced our paper view files and our folders, but we also reduced our paper space favorites from 66 favorites down to 11. And the biggest change here is that we eliminated some that just weren't aligning with our new design, but we also combined them into our annotation kit. So rather than all of those annotations being saved as one individual favorite 20 times over, we combined it into one annotation kit favorite, meaning that when you just have to pull in one favorite and it gives you all of them. And then you know exactly like, oh, I have access to this type of leader versus that arrow, and this red bubble versus that black bubble. And then we also lessened our view clip add-on templates from 12 down to 7. So like I mentioned previously, we eliminated the frames around everything. We decided to get rid of the scale on our preliminary drawings and changed up some things on the filter aspect of things, and that helped us condense those down. So in my opinion, less reusable files is quite honestly the biggest win of them all. So now I want to just leave you with a few tips and tricks for streamlining your own paper views. The first being to use data fields whenever possible for things like designer name, account manager name, project name, etc. Data fields allow you to set a text box to read a certain field variable so that you only need to change that information once, and then wherever that data field is in your papers, it will automatically update. So we saw this when I updated the preliminary phase to final phase. So that one change would now affect all 10 of my sheets. Next is to utilize help grids. So this makes aligning and spacing items much easier and takes the guesswork out of it. So I've got multiple help grids layered on our pages, and I'll just do a quick demo of that here to show that. So I'm going to go over to just a more simple page. So on this sheet, and actually, I'm going to just go to our template file. So here you can see there's a lot of different divider lines in here. So on the right-hand side, there's a help grid here with 5 vertical separators, and it's just covering this portion of the drawing. So this is kind of our information section. So if I want to bring maybe just product information, so we've determined that our installers need to know what type of table or what type of panel system is on the drawing. So that's where we include that information here. So I can, of course, bring this over 4-inch it using 4 in the orthogonal line. But now, since I don't need my install notes, I want it to be up at the top. So I can either just guess and try to align it there, or if I grab in the upper corner of that text box, it will snap right to that help grid. So I can back that up. So I can drag it even from here and just go straight there. It definitely takes the guesswork out of it, makes things easy to snap to. And then also it will help aligning items in here. So let's say my image is only this big, but I want it to be centered here. So it'll snap to any of these intersections, and then I can realign and readjust as needed. And then I've also overlapped these a ton. So I've got a help grid up in the top portion, and this is kind of our, we've got our client name up here and the room name, room number. And then I also have a help grid for the entire workspace, or where we include all of our information. I've got a help grid for the title block. And then I've got one here that just includes the kind of the viewport space and the rendering space. And that's the one that's divided into 4 horizontal and 2 vertical right now. And then I believe, yes, there's one that just extends to all of the workspace, including the viewport, the rendering, and the title, the information zone. So I do this just in case one of them gets accidentally deleted, and there should always be something there that you can lock your information to and not have to guess where to put items. So then that brings me to the outer margin. So definitely utilize this space. As you can see on our papers, we really maximize this area for including instructions for what should be included when, the configuration of viewports, and different annotations. I have gotten a lot of feedback from designers that this is super helpful, because I know we probably all understand that CET gets a little bit finicky sometimes, and sometimes you just have to delete a viewport and start over. So having all of this information out there really helps the designers remember, like, oh, I need to add a scale here, or oh, I need to add a black and white filter, and then turn off the these specific categories. So super helpful. And then if you don't want to use the help grid, you can add those instructions for moving things onto the page to align with that pink line. So move it 4 or move it 3 or what have you. And then next, creating CET pages to match a PowerPoint presentation definitely takes some fine tuning and can be a little bit tedious, but I promise it's worth it. A few things to consider. So logo sizing. This is typically either your company's logo or maybe your client's logo. And I wanted to ensure that the logo was the exact same size and in the same location as our PowerPoint presentation. And since our logo is along that bottom gray bar, the logo and the gray bar are the two items that remain the same between each tool. So it's imperative that they align correctly. And then the text and shape alignment. So again, that gray bar at the bottom is very important to be consistent because it really grounds the page. So maybe a text box is shifted for one reason or another. That's fine, but as that gray bar, that's always going to be the same and will always ground and link the pages to each other. And then finally, the text sizes. So this is probably the most challenging thing to align between the two programs, mainly because CET's text tools aren't the easiest to work with, and their scale for sizing the text is not the same as PowerPoint. So we knew that some basic sizes that worked well in PowerPoint, for example, size 10 to 12 is good for body text. And we don't want to go smaller than size 8 font for things like a disclaimer or notes. However, since I think CET's scale is based on inches, we're dealing with decimal sizes in paper space. So this took a lot of trial and error, and I utilized that export to PowerPoint function to modify the sizes in CET, and then export it to PowerPoint, and then check the font size to see if it was somewhere close. And then if I needed to modify it, I would go back to CET, modify as needed, and then repeat that process over and over again. So since I already went through all of the trouble to figure out which size in CET matches the size of PowerPoint, I wanted to share that information with you today and leave that with you. So you can see here that they're not exact. So I got them as close as I could to PowerPoint sizes. So we got it to 8.6 or 10.8, which in my opinion is close enough. It's 80% of the way there, as I could say. So this is at least a really good starting point to base your text styles off of. And then the last piece of advice that I want to leave you with is to test it before you fully implement the changes. So I would definitely start by test printing a layout to help confirm that the font sizes are all legible, things aren't overlapping each other, or maybe they're layered weird, and so that the layout looks good, both printed and on the screen. It would definitely be a shame to update all of your papers and then realize that one thing in your title block wasn't layered properly and maybe that gray bar is actually hiding your logo despite it looking okay in CET. So for example, with us, we did a round of test prints after some revisions. We've done, I think, 5 iterations of these paper refreshes. So during one of those iterations, we did a print and we realized that our font size is feeling too large. And I think this got past us for so long just because we are dealing with just so much digital things now, and it's not as often that we're printing stuff. But our font size was more of like a size 12 in PowerPoint. So we decided to drop the size to be closer to 10. So we're using black here in the table as 0.15 is our new just general text that we use most often. And that read a lot better in print. So once you confirm that everything looks good in print and on the screen, I would then create a small batch of papers that you can have someone or a small group of someone's test on some projects so they can see how it functions and if anything needs to be revised. Another thing that we discovered during our testing period is that some of the text boxes on our little number bubble annotations somehow got messed up and they showed up massive on the sheet and they just had to be deleted. They weren't even allowing people to edit the font size, which was super weird. But in this case, I'm glad I created just a handful of pages and had just a small group of people test it. So we didn't launch everything to everybody and have to backpedal a ton to fix it. So I'm going to end on one final note, and that's to request your help to submit a feature request. I think it would be really, really awesome to have the ability to use blocks in Paperspace. The biggest use case I could see this with is with the title block information. So of course, as I've been explaining my experience, I had to update just the logo on all 172 pages. But imagine if I had that information in a Paperspace block where I could edit the logo once and then it would apply to every single paper. That would literally save me probably hours, maybe days, I don't know. Another use case that I could see is with image swatches and information. We often like to include these just as a quick visual reference of what finish is included on what typical. And they often show up on multiple pages if we have multiple office typicals or workstations and they all have the same laminate on them. Well, let's say that laminate changes from an oak to a walnut. Now I have to go to maybe 5 to 10 pages and update that image, double click, find it in my files, wait for that to load, and then also change the description of it from oak to walnut. Now imagine if we could have that in a block. I could simply update it once, and then it would change on all of those papers. So if you agree and you think that this may also benefit your workflow, please also submit this as a feature request. And there's 2 ways you can go about that. You can either do that on the Commercial Interiors Roadmap by clicking Submit an Idea up in the upper right-hand corner, or go to Help, Send Feedback in CET. And you can simply just copy and paste this italicized text and hit Submit. So it should be a fairly quick thing to do once you get back from the conference. Thank you, and that concludes my session.